The motel room door was already open when Sarah Chen arrived at 11:47 p.m., and that single detail, that 2-inch gap between the door and its frame, would save her life before dawn. She had driven nearly 7 hours from Denver to reach this place, a rundown establishment called the Pine Rest Motor Lodge just off Interstate 70 in rural Kansas, and exhaustion had settled deep into her bones like concrete. The parking lot held only 4 other vehicles: a rusted pickup truck, a white sedan with Texas plates, a minivan with a family sleeping inside, and a black SUV parked crookedly across 2 spaces near the back. Sarah noticed that SUV immediately. Something about the way it sat there, engine off but windows down despite the October chill, made her pause with her hand on her own car door. She watched it for a full 30 seconds. Nothing moved. No interior light, no cigarette glow, just darkness folded into darkness. She grabbed her overnight bag, locked her Honda Civic, and walked toward the lobby, her sneakers crunching on gravel that hadn't been replaced in decades. The night clerk was a thin man in his 60s named Harold, according to his faded name tag, and he barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when she requested a room. $42, he mumbled. Room 14, end of the building. Ice machine's broken. Sarah paid cash. She always paid cash when traveling alone, a habit her father had drilled into her since she was 16, and took the physical key he slid across the counter. Not a key card, an actual brass key on a plastic diamond-shaped tag. The walk to room 14 felt longer than it should have. The overhead lights along the exterior corridor flickered in an arrhythmic pattern, buzzing like dying insects, casting her shadow in stuttering fragments against the peeling turquoise doors. She counted the rooms as she passed: 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then 14. The door was open. Sarah stopped walking. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, suspended in that terrible space where instinct screams louder than logic. She had not been to this room before. She had never stayed at this motel. The key was still cold in her palm, unused, and yet the door to room 14 stood open, not wide, not welcoming, but cracked just enough to suggest that someone had left in a hurry, or that someone was waiting inside for her to enter. The rational part of her brain, the part that had earned a master's degree in criminal psychology from the University of Colorado, began cataloging possibilities. A previous guest forgot to close it, the lock was broken, housekeeping made an error. But the primal part of her brain, the part that had kept her ancestors alive on African savannas millions of years ago, was already backing away. She did not touch the door. She did not call out. Instead, Sarah turned around and walked, not ran. Walking was important. Running attracted attention, back toward the lobby. Her heart was a fist pounding against her ribs. 15 steps, 20, 25. She glanced over her shoulder once and saw nothing. Just the empty corridor and that partially open door at the far end, a black rectangle in a wall of turquoise. Harold looked up when she entered the lobby again, mild annoyance crossing his weathered features. "Problem?" he asked. Sarah kept her voice steady. "Room 14's door was open when I got there. I didn't go inside. Has anyone else checked into that room tonight?" Harold frowned, consulted a paper ledger. Paper, not a computer. Everything about this place was 30 years out of date, and shook his head. "Nope, been empty since Tuesday. Probably didn't latch right when the cleaner left." He said it casually, dismissively, the way people do when they've never had a reason to fear the dark. Sarah considered her options. She could demand a different room, she could leave entirely, drive another hour to the next town, find a well-lit chain hotel with electronic locks and security cameras. But it was nearly midnight, she had been awake for 19 hours, and the rational part of her brain was starting to win the argument against the primal part. "Can you come check it with me?" she asked. Harold sighed, the sigh of a man being asked to do something beyond his job description, but he grabbed a flashlight from beneath the counter and followed her outside. They walked together down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in tandem, the flickering lights making everything feel like a scene from a film she didn't want to be in. When they reached room 14, Harold pushed the door fully open with his flashlight, swept the beam across the interior, and stepped inside. Sarah stayed in the doorway, watching. The room was empty. 2 double beds with floral bedspreads that were ugly in 1987 and were uglier now. A television bolted to the dresser. A bathroom with the door standing open, revealing a toilet, a sink, and a shower curtain pulled closed. Harold walked to the bathroom, yanked the curtain back, nothing, just a clean tub with a rust stain near the drain, and turned to face her with an expression that said, "Satisfied now?" But Sarah was not satisfied. Her eyes had found something Harold's flashlight had missed, a single wet footprint on the carpet near the window, the kind of mark a shoe makes when it steps in a puddle and then steps somewhere dry. The window was closed, the curtains were drawn, there was no puddle inside the room, which meant someone had entered through that window recently, someone whose shoes were wet from the grass outside, someone who had been in this room before she arrived and who had left through the front door when they heard her coming. "There's a footprint," Sarah said quietly. Harold squinted at the carpet, probably from the cleaner. "It's wet. So, it rained this afternoon. The carpet around it is dry. That print was made recently, within the last hour." Harold stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah watched something shift behind his eyes. Not fear exactly, but the first flicker of doubt, the beginning of a question he didn't want to ask. "Look, I can give you a different room if you want. Room 6 is open, other side of the building." Sarah nodded. She would take room 6. She would push the dresser against the door. She would sleep with her car keys in her hand and her phone on the pillow beside her. But first she needed to understand what was happening here, because her training had taught her that coincidences were rarely coincidental and that patterns existed even when they weren't immediately visible. "I'm going to make a phone call," she told Harold. "I might need you to answer some questions afterwards." She stepped outside, walked to her car, and dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years, a number belonging to Detective Marcus Webb of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, a man she'd worked with on a serial case in 2022, a man who owed her a favor. He answered on the 4th ring. "This better be important." "Marcus, it's Sarah Chen. I need you to run a search for me. Missing persons reports, unsolved disappearances, anything within a 50-mile radius of a motel called Pine Rest Motor Lodge near Colby, Kansas. Focus on the last 12 months, single female travelers, nighttime check-ins, ages 20 to 40. There was a pause, the sound of someone sitting up in bed, suddenly awake. "Sarah, what did you find out there?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think someone is hunting here, and I think I was supposed to be next." The next 4 hours were the longest of Sarah's life.
She sat in the lobby with Harold, drinking terrible coffee from a machine that wheezed like an asthmatic, while Marcus ran his search and called her back with updates. First hit, a 26-year-old woman named Jessica Morales, last seen at a gas station 12 miles from the motel in March, never found. Second hit, a 31-year-old woman named Dana Whitfield, reported missing by her sister in May. Last known location was somewhere in western Kansas. Third hit, a 24-year-old woman named Brianna Cole, vanished in August, car found abandoned on a county road 5 miles from, and Sarah felt her blood turn to ice when Marcus read this part, a property owned by a man named Leonard Vance, who also happened to own the Pine Rest Motor Lodge. Sarah looked at Harold. "Who's Leonard Vance?" Harold's face went pale. "The owner. He lives about a mile up the road, comes by sometimes to check on things." "Does he have a key to the rooms?" Harold didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was confirmation enough. At 4:12 a.m., 2 KBI vehicles pulled into the parking lot of the Pine Rest Motor Lodge, followed by a county sheriff's cruiser. Sarah watched from the window of the lobby as agents approached the black SUV that had been parked crookedly across 2 spaces all night, the SUV she had noticed when she first arrived, the SUV with its windows down despite the cold, and found it registered to Leonard Vance. At 4:38 a.m., agents executed a search warrant on Vance's property 1 mile up the road. At 5:15 a.m., they found a basement. At 5:47 a.m., Marcus called Sarah one last time. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion and horror. "3 bodies," he said, "buried in the basement. We're still processing the scene." Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about the door to room 14, standing open in the darkness. She thought about the wet footprint on the carpet. She thought about Leonard Vance, waiting in that black SUV, watching her arrive, watching her walk toward his trap. He had been there the whole time, parked in the shadows, patient, ready. If she had walked into that room without noticing the open door, if she had been tired enough, distracted enough, careless enough, she would have become the 4th body in that basement. Instead, She had listened to the whisper of instinct, the ancient voice that says something is wrong, something is watching, do not enter. Dawn broke over the Kansas plains at 6:23 a.m., painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Sarah Chen stood in the parking lot of the Pine Rest Motor Lodge, breathing air that tasted like dust and diesel and the first fragile promise of morning. Behind her, the motel was surrounded by crime scene tape. Ahead of her, the highway stretched toward a horizon she could finally see. She got in her car. She drove east, toward the rising sun, toward home. And she never stopped at a motel with an open door again, because she understood now, with a clarity that would never leave her, that survival was not about being strong, or being fast, or being brave, but about being the one who notices the detail that doesn't belong, the shadow that moves wrong, the silence that feels too heavy, and trusting that noticing enough to walk away.